is the Malden Board of Appeal hearing for October 16th, 2019, which is recorded by the local cable TV access. And should anyone presently want to record, they may, but they should inform us of that. Hearing and seeing none, we will proceed. We just have one petition this evening, and it is Petition 19-013 by Attorney Pat MacDonald on behalf of Robert Scarpaci, Trustee, for a variance of Section 400.1.2.1, Chapter 12 of the Revised Ordinances of 1991, as amended, of the City of Malden, namely the dimensional controls, side, rear, and front setback requirements, as per the plan COO 030994, 2019, at the property known as in number 10, Dianes View in Malden, also known by the Assessor's Parcel ID, map 152, block 570, parcel 013. Mr. MacDonald.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Patrick MacDonald with offices at 477 Eastern Avenue on behalf of the petitioner in this matter, Mr. Robert Scarpaci, involving his request for a dimensional control variance for his principal residence at 10 Dianes View here in Malden. Brief background for the benefit of the board. Mr. Scarpaci was in the process of selling his residence in the summer of this year, and as part of the normal course of that process, the prospective buyer had a mortgage inspection plan done, a plot plan done, which indicated that his property appeared to violate dimensional controls in effect with the city with respect to side and rear yard setbacks. This property was built in, or construction on it began in 1999. Mr. Scarpaci, through a builder, obtained a building permit at that time, and the original foundation plan depicted a foundation for the structure that was zoning compliant at the time, in that it was more than 10 feet from the side property line, more than 10 feet from the front property line, and more than 20 feet from the rear property line. However, for reasons unknown, when the property was constructed and the as-built foundation plan was submitted to the city, the foundation at least ended up being non-compliant. It was approximately 1 foot closer to the side property line. Somehow this got missed at the time. Construction of the property continued. The home was built, the deck was built, and a certificate of occupancy was issued by the building department in 2003. And fast forward to the present, Mr. Scarpaci has been living and occupying the property for the last 16 plus years, unaware that his property had some dimensional control issues, and as I said, only became aware of those when a mortgage inspection plan revealed them this summer as part of a pending sale. That sale did not go through because the matter needed to be resolved if possible, and the appropriate way to do that was to seek a variance at this point. I would respectfully suggest to the board that this petitioner meets the statutory requirements for a variance under these circumstances. First, I know a couple of the board members, I believe Chairman Yu and Assistant Chief Sullivan did a walk-through of the property today and probably observed that this is a somewhat unique property in that it's perched atop a cliff, basically. This is a heavily ledged area up in what has become Dianes View. That kind of condition is not something that exists throughout that zoning district, and therefore this is a unique parcel in that respect. I would further suggest that there's a significant hardship here, and that is that through no fault of his own, Mr. Scarpaci is now faced with a non-compliant property with respect to setbacks, despite having been issued a building permit for it for the past 16 plus years, and that if he is unable to obtain the relief that he's requested from this board, he literally will not be able to occupy his primary residence or sell it, which is his desire. And I further suggest that the third statutory prong has been met in that this particular relief does not derogate from the intent and purpose of the zoning statute. And while I don't diminish or disregard the importance of setbacks, they're in the zoning code for a reason. Again, the unique nature of this property makes them somewhat less important in this particular circumstance. Anyone who has viewed the property can see that the side yard and the rear yard aren't as much yard as they are almost sheer cliff. There's a significant drop-off. The nearest structures to Mr. Scarpaci's property are located quite a bit down below in terms of level than his, and therefore the fact that his home and the accompanying deck and stairs on both the rear and the side of the property do not have the kind of impact or potential detrimental effect they might otherwise have were we dealing with neighbors who were at the same level as his home. His neighbors to the rear and to the side of his property are located quite a bit beneath his and frankly aren't impacted at all by the fact that his structure is a foot closer to the property line than technically required by zoning, and the attached deck and stairs are somewhat closer, but again, not in a way that impacts or affects those neighbors in any way, shape, manner, or form. And as a consequence, again, I'd suggest that the statutory conditions have been met here. This is a bit of a unique situation. Again, this is not a proposed development. This is someone who built a home in good faith. Apparently, errors were made by the builder at the time the property was constructed. But he nevertheless was issued an occupancy permit and has been relying upon that for the past 16 years. And the inability to obtain this relief, again, would impose a significant and very serious hardship upon him. I would make one further technical note, Chairman and members of the board, is the notice that was issued by the Building Commissioner's office suggested that relief was needed for front, rear, and side yard setback dimensional controls. But I have obtained, through my client, a copy of the zoning ordinance that was in effect in 2003, which is the year the petitioner was granted his occupancy permit, and after the home had been built. And in reviewing that, it appears that at least at that time, it may not be the case today, but at least at that time, for purposes of measuring front setback, the measurement is made from the structure to the property line and does not specifically, by wording in the ordinance, involve or require that the measurement be made from stairs or landings, rather only porches, and I suspect that you could interpret a deck as being in the nature of a porch. So I would suggest to the board that no relief is technically required for front yard setback because the measurement is in excess of 15 feet from the structure. Any portion that is less than the 10-foot required by zoning at the time is stairs and landing, not porch, deck, or structure, and therefore that while we're happy to receive that relief, I don't think it's technically required, but we certainly do need the relief with respect to the side yard for both the structure and the attached deck and stairs, and for the rear, which is not so much the structure but the existing deck. My client is here with me. Should any board member have any questions that might be better or more easily answered by him, and happy to have him do that in the event there are questions.
Thank you, Mr. MacDonald. I'm going to ask a couple of questions, if I could. This was a prefab?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you mentioned, Pat, a couple of times about a certificate of occupancy in '03.
Yes.
Does anyone have that?
I have a copy. I can't speak to whether there's one in the file, but
No, I don't think we've seen that, so
can't.
that would be certainly helpful. Oh, okay. Oops, sorry. Okay, I am going to ask Mr. Miller, our building commissioner, to come up. Before I do, would any board member, I see one, like to speak with Mr. MacDonald before we have Mr. Miller come up? You want to speak with Mr. MacDonald now? Okay. We're going to use the mic tonight, right? Okay. All right.
Also might have
There you go.
an answer too for this. I'm not sure. When I was looking through the files and also down at the registry of deeds, there was a performance bond that was for the street
Correct.
that was included sidewalks, which I could have missed when I was looking at the property, but I don't see them. Has this been accepted? The street been accepted?
Diane's View is not an accepted public way. It remains a private way. However, I can represent to the board that there was quite a bit of work required by the city with respect to the construction of Diane's View at the time. In fact, the city required Mr. Scarpaci to use their preferred contractor in the construction of the way at that time, Charles Contracting. And my understanding is that all requirements of the city with respect to the construction of the way itself, Diane's View, were met, and the City of Malden Engineering Department did sign off on that city at that time. But as I had to advise my client, the sign-off by the engineering department with respect to the construction of the way does not make Diane's View a public way. There's a separate process for that, which has never been undertaken up to this point, but doesn't necessarily need to be undertaken. But at the time, what was being determined by the city was the way constructed in a satisfactory manner? And my client tells me that it was, and that the city signed off on it.
And do we have proof of that?
I don't have any paperwork except to say that it's 16 years later and no one has bothered to approach him regarding that, but perhaps Mr. Scarpaci could give a little bit more detailed information. Would you like to come up?
One thing, though, Pat, before Mr. Scarpaci comes up, when you said the city accept, you're talking about engineering.
Engineering, yes.
Right, but that process that didn't happen that you alluded to is going into the front of the DPW Commission to...
I believe, I'm not entirely familiar with the municipal process for formal acceptance of a public way in the city, but I believe it begins, I believe a paper needs to be brought forward before the city council initially, probably by the ward council. That would be an obvious choice. And then it makes its way to the engineering department, whereby they do the technical determination regarding the technical aspects of the way before anything. So
It sounds like we didn't go past that point.
no, but
Didn't get to the DPW and then the full council.
no, but establishment of Diane's View as a public way was not part of the subdivision approval that was obtained by Mr. Scarpaci at the time. He not only had his own personal residence built, he built several other buildings up at that cul-de-sac. And construction of a way was an integral part of that, but it did not extend to ultimate approval and acceptance of that way as a public way within the city. It was about the physical construction of the way being done in accordance with the specifications laid out by the city engineering department.
We've had properties before that aren't on public ways, or at least people requesting variances for that. I mean, we're granting 2 variances, but I mean, if it's not in a public way even, we're not supposed to particularly be looking at that unless they're requesting a variance for that also, but that hasn't been advertised.
If it's not on a public street, for the lack of frontage on a public street. All right, well,
Maybe Mr. Nelson.
oh, well, I think Mr. Scarpaci was going to address
Okay.
an earlier question of yours, so why don't we do that, and then we will ask Mr. Miller to come up. John, just repeat what the question you sort of had for Mr. Scarpaci.
My name is Robert Scarpaci. I live at 10 Dianes View, Malden.
Well, the planning board had a list of requirements for the street, and I mean, I'm not an engineer, so I don't, but I it talks about asphalts and depths and crushed aggregate, and I don't know. But it does say, I know what a sidewalk is, and I didn't see one. So, and that's supposed to go along the right side of the roadway leading to the cul-de-sac and along the cul-de-sac. So it looks, I don't seem that condition was meant to make it a public street to be accepted by the city.
See, the Dianes View is a very narrow street.
Yeah, I know.
And at the time, Jack Colangelo, the fire chief, wanted me to put curved sidewalks, because every time the fire trucks come up there, they will whip their tires. They hit a couple of times. They would cut their tires. So Jack asked me if I could put slanted sidewalks, which I did. Coming up Dianes View, they're all slanted. So when the fire rappers comes around the corner, they can go right up and come off it. Before they were whacking the sidewalk if they did
Right,
it.
well, Cape Cod curb, I saw that, and I looked that up, I know what
Yeah.
that is now, but
And
but the sidewalk part, I mean, the city has dimensions for sidewalks.
Well, the street was so narrow that they couldn't put a 3-foot or 4-foot sidewalk. It would have closed the street right up. So at the time, Jack Kelly says, put a sidewalk as much as you can on both sides and go ahead and then go up with it and then come around.
I see mulch,
And that's what I did.
I see mulch. It says,
Well, it's so narrow, it's only like 2 feet. I could cement
well, I know,
it.
but my concern is it's not a public way. You can't build a house if it's not a public way. And I understand that they were probably allowing building to go on because it was going to be accepted as a public way. But if the work to make it so, I mean, and I don't doubt that Kelly and Jack Colangelo and whatever else may have told you things, but the fact is that we have to have evidence tonight.
Oh, I have no evidence I can tell you about that. All I know is when I finished it up, Jack Kelly come up, looked at everything, he said everything's fine. Plus they gave me back all my bond money. I said, the road's done, you put the trees in, you did what you're supposed to do. And I thought at the time they accepted it. I didn't know any better at that time. And they gave me back my money, all my bond that I put up, they gave me the check back. I thought that was the end of it. I didn't know about going further. I was never told anything to go back further.
Jack didn't indicate that, the next step?
No, no.
May I interject here, Mr. Chairman? First of all, I think the biggest indicator of municipal satisfaction with the construction of the way was the release of the performance bond. If they were dissatisfied in any way with the construction of the street, they would not have released this bond. I can also represent to the board, and some or all of the board members may be aware that there was a significant tax arrearage issue for Dianes View, which Mr. Scarpaci has recently cleared up totally. And as part of that process, I had a discussion with the city solicitor, Attorney Fallon, who specifically indicated to me, because my first question to her when this tax issue came up was, Kate, isn't this a public way? And the answer was, no, Pat, this is not a public way, and it was not ever intended or agreed to be a public way. It was never part of the approval of this development that Dianes View be formally accepted as a public way. It was only part of the approval that Dianes View be, again, constructed in accordance with the specifications laid out by the city's engineering department. And Mr. Scarpaci constructed the way in consultation with the engineering department, in consultation with the fire department at the time, and everybody who needed to sign off signed off, and the city ultimately returned to him his performance bond, which again I would suggest is the ultimate proof that at the time the city was satisfied with the construction of this street. And
we don't have any things signed off, right? Is that what you don't have? anyway? Somewhere there may be, somebody signed off on something?
I don't have that. I don't have that. I can only speak to what's occurred. I can't point to a particular piece of paper in the city's file anywhere that says this way is acceptable, or this way is accepted by the city. And again, by accepted, I mean its construction is considered satisfactory, not we are accepting it as a public way.
So do you believe then, going forward, it would remain on the tax rolls?
I believe going forward, it will continue to be a private way unless and until somebody takes a step to seek.
So you got 6 people up there, and it's going to be continue to be taxed.
It will be, unless and until accepted by the city. Now, my client, again, for the board's information, my client has made outreach to Ward Councilor Seeker. This is not a criticism, but he has made initial outreach to Ward Councilor Seeker because, again, my understanding of the process is that it must be initiated. It's a city council petition. Only the city council ultimately can accept a public way within the city, and a paper needs to be brought before the council for that purpose, and the ward councilor is the logical choice if it's a way within a particular ward councilor's ward. But Mr. Scarpaci can't make the city do anything, nor can any other residents on that. And they're not the only people in the city who abut private ways. There are any number of private ways in the city.
All right. With respect to the roadway, I want to get back to the issue that's in front of us about the request for the variances for the setbacks, but just to the issue about this roadway. The city treasurer, Mr. Davis, did respond to our board. We made an inquiry about the monies due on this roadway, and he's indicated that we can proceed with the hearing tonight. Mr. Scarpaci has paid all the back taxes on Diane's View, the road. The lien has been released. On 10 Diane's View, which is the subject property, which is in front of us this evening, which is his property, there is first quarter fiscal 20 taxes in the arrears. However, it's expected that Mr. Scarpaci will pay this shortly. Once that is paid, I will send out a note that the hold has been lifted. So again, the monies that were deemed due on the roadway apparently were paid recently. There is some arrears on the single-family dwelling up there. Well, I'm going to ask but before Mr. MacDonald sits down, he's welcome back certainly, but I'm going to ask Mr. Miller to come up unless anyone had, no? Okay. If we could, Mr. Mill, here we go.
Good evening.
Good evening. The petitioner came to your department looking for a certificate of occupancy, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you've denied and quoted 3 sections of the code that all seem to pertain to setbacks. Before addressing that, would you have, I assume you've looked at the file, and would you be able to shed light or weigh in on anything about that 20-year period and what happened or didn't happen?
Sure. I'm going to agree with most of what Attorney MacDonald said. So we have a proposed foundation plan that was presented with the original building permit application, which showed the foundation conforming to setbacks. And then we have a as-built plan of the foundation as constructed, which obviously, as Attorney MacDonald said, shows violations of the side and the rear. He also did bring to me tonight, before the meeting started, a copy of the zoning ordinance from 2003, and he is correct that at that time, steps and landings were not included, whereas in today's zoning they are included. So he is correct that they do not need a variance of frontage. So you certainly can grant it, or you can strike it, or however you want to handle that. But as far as I'm concerned, you're only dealing with the side and the rear. And as he said, the decks that were added onto the left and rear of the house, those are not stairs and landings, so those do have to comply with the setback. So that's where your violation stands.
Where is that valuable 2003 document? Is it still over there?
The occupancy?
Were you aware of that? Did you see that in the file?
Of the occupancy?
Yeah.
I
From
don't
03?
know if I was aware of it or not.
So had you been, would we be here this evening?
Yeah, that doesn't legalize the foundation.
All right.
It's two different things.
Okay.
I mean,
Questions?
Well, I just didn't know what that exactly, I mean, it doesn't really say it grants anything, it just says a remarks. So I'm not sure how maybe that's how they wrote them back then.
Yeah, I think
mean,
there's,
They didn't give out a certificate, I mean, this is just a thing in the file.
it's not signed, it does say to occupy for single-family dwelling.
But I mean,
Right.
it doesn't,
Did you see this at all?
I didn't.
Could I just have to peek at it?
I mean, he may be more familiar with how they would.
And someone's
having
written up
looked
here
at
about
them.
Mass General laws. That's customary to what I've seen in some of the historical files that we have. Yep, okay. Okay, any questions for?
Just
I'm
to
sorry,
say, our
okay.
department, I wasn't obviously here then, but our department, you probably wouldn't believe how recently we were still using index cards. So a lot of our records are actually index cards that show permits, occupancies, all kinds of stuff.
So, and on the issue of the street, it is not a,
In my opinion, so subdivisions, when they're constructed, they fall under different rules than if you were just going to go to a street and construct a house on a lot. So the dimensional controls, the areas, the frontage, all that stuff gets accepted, for lack of a better term, at that approval process for the development. So again, not too often I'm going to agree with, Attorney MacDonald this many times in one night, but don't get used to it. The acceptance of the street is not something that Mr. Scarpaci could have naturally accepted or expected to happen at the completion of all the properties. It is exactly as was said. It's a process initiated by a city councilor. It goes through council. It then gets sent to engineering, traffic commission, DPW. They get their hands on it. In this particular situation, what I would guess would happen, I don't know this, but I would guess would be once it left city council, engineering, traffic, and DPW would start to suggest some of those changes that you talked about with sidewalks and, speed limit signs and whatever else, crosswalks. So at that point is when the city takes a private piece of land and brings it up to snuff to comply with the city's rules. So the short answer is no, I don't think there's an issue with it.
Okay.
I have a question for you. Given the nature of the timing between the two plot plans and technology that we use today versus, was it 98? I have an older plot plan with a much larger lot area, 10,950 square feet, and then one from 2019, which a much smaller lot area. Do you ever find that within 30 years, 20 years, more recent plot plan may be more accurate than one 30 years ago and show a different size or even locations of lot lines?
The difference in the size of the lot is surprising, especially because, 1998, we're not talking about the Stone Ages, it wasn't that long ago. When it comes to the differences in the setbacks, that's something you do sometimes see based off of advances in technology, better control points that were developed along the way, maybe closer control, and then differences in where one person will measure to versus one surveyor versus another. Some surveyors measure to foundations, some measure to siding, some measure to overhangs, and I don't know where any of these guys measured to. So the changes, the differences in the setbacks don't really shock me. The difference in the lot size is kind of not typical, yeah.
And then I guess my last question would be, are there any tolerances that you use when judging setback violations? So it has to be exact to the inch. There's no tolerance forgiveness.
No, it has to be to the regulation. Yep.
That's all, thanks.
I think we're all
Good,
set.
thanks.
Mr. Scarpaci, was your original intent to build another house to the right of number 10, but due to, I guess, a bunch of ledge that changed? It looks like they're tucked there nicely, and then there's a big void between 10 and the first neighbor.
I wasn't going to build there, no.
I was just wondering if that was what
I just left
what
that.
accounted for the change in the site area between the two plans. That's all.
There was enough, I could have put a house there if I wanted, it was laid out, but I didn't do that. I let it,
Lot of ledge in there, isn't there?
I had to break the ledge, that whole mountain was ledge, I had
Yeah.
to break all the ledge.
Right.
I could have put a house, but I didn't want to do it.
Yeah,
You could walk
okay.
out, I think, almost.
Thank you. Okay, 4. Who'd you like to speak to it, Adam? Okay.
This property was built in 1999, or this home, is that correct?
I believe construction began in 1999. That's the date of the, the date of the original building permit is 3/18/98, and these various plot plans were prepared at different times. One was February 3rd, 98. The proposed foundation plan was February of 98. The as-built foundation plan was dated June of 1998. So yes, I think people were starting to work on this lot and on this house in 1998.
Well, if I'm correct, the CO was issued in 2003.
That's correct.
So why did it take 5 years to get a CO for this?
That I don't know unless Mr. Scarpaci can explain. Do you have an explanation for why, if construction was started in 1998?
The house wasn't finished until 2002.
It took 4 years to build?
I had to do another project on the other house. I was doing 4 houses.
He was building multiple properties in the subdivision, so this one probably was the last one to be completed, because it ended up being his personal residence as opposed to one he was selling to third parties.
Has this problem come up with any of his other homes? Has any issue come up with any setback violation? Does he own these properties still, or have they been sold?
All of the other homes that were built at around that time have been sold to third parties, and some of them have changed hands multiple times during the intervening approximately 20-year period. And the only issue that was brought to his attention this year was the tax issue on Diane's View.
On the private road nature.
On the private road. He was never made aware by any of his neighbors that they were having any kind of problem with their homes, with their dimensional controls, or with Diane's View as a private way until this year.
My last question is, what particularly flagged this for the potential buyer? Did they actually measure, did they look at the plot plan and just compare it to the
As part of a
variance?
conventional mortgage application process, the lender has or the attorney to whom the mortgage loan is assigned by the lender will have a land surveyor or a registered engineer go out and do a plot plan, or what's called a mortgage inspection plan. It's not a full instrument survey, it's a tape measure and eye survey, but one of its principal purposes is to see if there are issues like this, dimensional control problems that might impact the legality of the property. And that's how this popped up in June or July of this year. A surveyor went out for the prospective buyer. The plot plan came back, and I was contacted by counsel for that buyer saying, I think you have a problem. Your client's home violates dimensional controls in the city of Malden.
Okay, Pat, I want to return this to you, and I'm embarrassed to say that you have it and we don't, so could I ask you to get us a copy?
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyone else have any questions?
But, yeah, the deck, when was that constructed with the house? Was it constructed after the house?
There's one to the left and one to the right and rear.
Was the deck built along with the house? At the same time you constructed? Apparently the deck was built in conjunction with the home itself.
But it wasn't.
Second easement to get out the house, so I had to put a deck in the back. So
right? Were there permits issued for the deck?
Mr. Scott, his recollection is that the deck was part of the house when it was built. So as I said, other people were making application, other people were preparing the plans, and he's frankly a little vague on those details. But it was built. I can assure the board the deck was built at the time the home was built, and the deck was in existence at the time the certificate of occupancy issued in April of 2003.
Okay, I think we'll open up to open the public portion of the hearing and see if there's anyone that would care to participate. Would there be anyone here that wants to speak in favor of the variances being granted? In hearing and seeing none, would there be anyone here to speak in opposition? Hearing and seeing none, we'll close those portions of the hearing. Anyone like to make a motion?
Just a question. This is, I mean, I'm concerned about the lack of documentation on a lot of this material here, and the fact that the deck, even as the proposed property, building a deck like that would have encroached on that side yard. I mean, I wonder how the building department would have. I mean, it extends out beyond the edge of the building, which was at 10.1 feet. I mean, it was only 1/10 of a foot that deck could be any wider than the house and be at the 10 feet. And it looks like, that, how many sides do we have there? 4? I mean, sided seating area, I guess, is even wider than the house. And, I hate to grant permits on things that are curable. I mean, if you need a deck, you need a way to get down. It's doable without extending beyond the house. I mean, if someone had looked at this, you made a shorter deck, you didn't make it as wide, you put the stairs closer to the house, all that can be done, and we can't move the foundation. I mean, it's done now. I mean, it must be pretty hard by now. And like I say, the steps, I can remember when they made the steps part of measurements, and before it wasn't. So I mean, that I don't have a lot of issue with. But
would you like to make a motion with conditions?
Sure, I would like to make a motion then, after having talked my way through this, that we grant a variance for the front setback and the side setback of the house. But
The left side,
left side,
the 9.5 feet.
but not grant the rear, and that the deck be brought
Into
line,
compliance.
into conformity with the setbacks.
And how much in the rear?
Current setbacks.
How much in the rear would be needed to bring that into compliance?
I'm not a builder. I mean, we need
What's the setbacks?
20 feet. So I mean, basically, you'd have to cut off part of the deck on that side, and you'd have to cut off part of the deck on that octagonal side, take a corner off the side.
It's showing, I'm looking at the 2019 plan,
And currently move the stairs too on the side. Nelson, if we adjusted the deck so to be more in conformity with setbacks, he would have to move the side stairs also, because now we measure from the stairs. Is that right? If he was going to get a permit for this, here, let me show you on my map. If we said we were going to, on the right side, it had to be brought into, well, everywhere, on the rear setback, it had to become,
To make the rear in compliance.
to make the rear in compliance.
Yep.
And on that side, if we he had to move that deck, that side there, so that it would be no greater than that 9.5. I mean, we can't move the foundation. So he would have to recess the stairs into the deck, because we measure now from the deck. I mean, he'd have to meet current measurements.
So I'm not going to venture to tell the board,
Well, you're going to grant a
which way to
permit for
go.
him to do that.
but you can certainly grant a variance, which would bring that side of the house in conformance with the rules under which it was built. So you could ignore the staircase, allow that to be into the setbacks, just like you are with the front.
But the back of that deck, the side of that deck is even, encroaches even more
The deck would,
than the house
right,
and the foundation.
right. So you,
And we don't have any building permit or anything for the deck.
we don't. It was constructed with the house, under the same permit.
Yeah. So we could just cut that off.
So I think we were saying in 2003, this was.
Right. So you would allow that? I mean, it wouldn't fall under the, I mean, now if someone goes for new permit to do work, they have to come to current codes. So that would be okay?
Yeah, I
I mean,
think.
I just as soon see it,
I think what we're doing here is kind of going into the time machine a little bit, so I think accepting something that was in compliance at that time would make sense, would be
all right,
fine.
so we just have to take that back to the 9.5 feet.
If that's how you vote.
I mean, we're gonna have to do the, all right?
Yep.
So you're saying here, if I'm looking at, we're looking at this plan.
Yep.
You're saying over here that this whole part should fall within under 10 feet, or at least 10 feet?
The 9 point, whatever the house is at now, I mean, it's 9.5 feet,
It is 9, what was the requirement back then, was it 10?
10 feet.
So you're saying everything should go to 10? should
Well,
go
we
back?
can't move the house.
Yeah,
I mean, we could make the deck fall within the 10 feet if you want.
yeah, I see what you're saying. So, okay.
I mean, we couldn't. I don't know how to do that, but, I mean, that could be a requirement that the deck be brought into the 10-foot setback that was required at that time.
I thought you were talking about the one to the rear, though.
Also that, too.
Oh, okay.
And the part on the right rear of the house, that would have to be brought to 20.
You want to restate your motion and be clear so that the applicant can know what's
Right.
being voted?
So that we would grant a variance for the front setback on the side setback, that all parts of the deck would have to be brought into 10 feet setback from the lot line,
On the front?
the side.
Yeah, because Mr. Nelson said Mr. Miller said the front is not even at issue.
Like, I know, but it's.
It's
well,
stated in the.
It's stated in
Yeah,
here.
no, I know.
That we've got, so I
Okay.
mean, fine.
We should
we'll,
put it
you
in the
know,
motion, right?
Or
Okay.
it's not necessary, we could, if that's what you want to just call it, that it was found to be not necessary to do that. And on the rear, that no part of the deck at the rear be closer than the 20 feet.
Okay, state
To the
that
lot
again, that the rear
Be no closer than 20 feet from the back lot line.
from the lot line, okay. Would there be a second?
And I'm sorry, rear, you mean right here?
Wherever it's, yeah, wherever the whole back. deck,
Closest
20
point.
feet. Yeah. Wherever it would be.
Would there be a second?
I would second that. I think that's a reasonable request to give permission for the house and the foundation to stay where it is and modify the deck as needed.
Okay. All those in favor? Aye?
All right.
Bill? Okay, so by a vote of 5-0, was approved with conditions.
Can you
If you
just
want us to restate them?
Yeah, would you mind just restating this one more time for me?
Right, well, again, that we grant a variance for the frontage, which may or may not be necessary, but
Okay.
it's part of our requirements now. And that the that the left side of the deck be brought no closer than 10 feet, modified to be no closer than 10 feet from the left side lot line. And in the rear, that no part of the deck be closer than 20 feet
To the
to
lot line.
the rear lot line.
Thank you.
Question, Pat? I'm sorry? All set?
No, yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Who's going to pay for the road?
I'm sorry?
Who's going to pay for the road?
5-0. We voted 5-0. Yeah.
I was going to say, who's going to pay the taxes on the road now when he leaves?
Yeah, I know, that's why I said that going forward, it's still gonna be a taxable parcel. I'm sorry. All right, we're all set, folks, thank you. We have minutes to approve from, I guess, September hearing. Everyone get a chance to review the minutes, and would there be any motions?
I vote to approve them.
Okay. Second? All those in favor? 5-0?
Aye.
Okay. Last thing is, we're going to, go ahead, can I help you?
Sorry.
Yeah.
I live in Dianes.
Where?
Dianes. This is Scarpaci's.
Okay, you probably should have come up because we closed the
Well,
hearing.
it's different because what my question is, what's the difference between a private road and a public road?
City doesn't maintain it. City does not maintain it.
And what does it mean for taxes, right? Does it have anything to do with
Somebody owns it. Who owns it? What does the city have it as? I mean, the developer owns it,
It's being built to Mr. Scarpaci at present.
because he was the developer.
So he's in charge of maintaining the road personally? He's the one that should be,
No, that's not ours. That's not part of our thing. Yeah, but yeah, you should talk to us sooner. But I mean, they're not in our bailiwick, really. I mean, on that, you guys would have to go talk to an attorney.
Maybe, yeah, either an attorney or the ward boss, who Mr. MacDonald made reference to, which is Councilor J. Dean Seeker. She's the council that represents the district. So,
he's in the process when he sells homes.
right.
Right. I mean, if you can get it approved as a street, and the city accepts it, then the city will take it.
Have rules and regulations that need to be looked at periodically just to stay with the times. So Kathy and I dug through the archives, put together as much info as we could, and from that, she read through and crafted a current proposed set, and I'm assuming everyone got them. And I would just ask maybe if you could take a peek at them over the next month or so, and maybe we could talk about them. We have to accept them in the public setting. And so if everyone could just take a peek. Bill already has and made a few suggestions. Kathy and I had already played with it a month or two ago. So we just want everyone to weigh in if you think there's anything that's lacking, any editing. And then maybe we could talk about it, and we'll have to put it on the agenda because we have to have it to the public. The public has to be aware because we have to ask them if they want to participate. So if, a little homework, all right? I know I don't like to give out a lot of homework, but. Say again? Yeah. Is that what we got? Yeah. Yeah. And didn't we, you drafted them, I had a little input, and then,
we changed it.
and that was sent to everyone.
It was. So
Okay.
I just gave you those.
Yeah, those hard copies were just to see how things were talked about 20 years ago, and, you know. So if you just would take a peek, and maybe we could talk about it again next month. I got to put it on the agenda, and then we got to accept them, and if there's any more changes. So with that, motion to adjourn. All those in favor? Aye, 7:24.